Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to the next edition of the DFS Down Under Show, presented by Draftstars. Draftstars, your number one daily fantasy platform in Australia, providing AFL contests. To this side over here, there he is. The big Hef is with me tonight for another live stream of AFL Daily Fantasy. Hef, no mucking about tonight. How are you? First of all, then we'll get stuck into some more AFL DFS this evening.
Nice to have you back, Smatho, after an interesting trip for you last week. Yeah, all good my end. I had a bit of a trim for the show and then realised I wear a hat anyway, so it didn't matter. But I came out looking like Nerland's Noel, so it was pretty good. Fared better than my son at the hairdressers, who asked for the Clippers on number 2 and came out looking like Dr. Evil. So it's been a mixed week, but now we're going to get into some DFS.
Number 2, and he came out with not much. That's a bit rich. I'm sure.
Well, she went all over the top, and it's been a rough week for the household.
Now, as I mentioned before, we are live streaming on the platforms here on Draftstars Facebook, Daily Fantasy Rankings, and also here on Twitter. So if you have any questions throughout the show, or any comments, or if you got any hot takes, drop them in the chat. We'll get it on the show, and obviously one of us or both of us will get to your questions throughout the show. Now, the reason why we're here, Hef, is this particular contest: Saints versus Tigers, $75,000 prize pool. Draftstars on Thursday night. Before we get stuck into the teams, etc., tell me, what have you learned in the first couple of weeks when you're playing AFL Daily Fantasy on Draftstars? Is there any things that you thought, okay, this is usually just what it is last couple of years, or is there anything that caught your eye in these first couple of weeks when playing Draftstars?
Look, I don't think much has caught my eye. We had can we call it an overreaction to the first week ruck scores? Where do we think that's sitting now, Smatho?
Well, good. Look, we've been trying to find the cheapies at the start of the year, which we always try to do. We get the cheap rucks in, but now, the salaries are now starting to catch up with particular players. And as we'll find out even tonight's show, the theme is going to be, it's pretty hard to try and find some value now.
The salaries are definitely starting to zero in a bit, but I think we did see it's important not to overreact week to week to obviously small samples if you're going week to week. We're starting to get a bit of data together on the points against tables and all that sort of thing. So we're moving from what we know into what we're learning this year. So there's a few different angles, but year to year things haven't changed a whole lot, I don't think.
No, fair enough. All right, let's get straight into these two particular matches. So, as always on the Down Under Show, we cover the Thursday night footy, which is the last Thursday night footy for a couple of weeks, actually, Hef. So next week we'll be back just on the regular Thursday night edition, but we've got the Thursday night and the Friday game. So we do start here with the Saints and the Tigers. The $75,000 contest is available from Draftstars. $7,415 is the first prize, as always, for a 75K. 125 max injuries, you can get into that. And the payment structure always goes down to $1,467 for your double your money in there. As you can see, there's also other contests, including the $10,000 high roller, the $5,002 mini, which is always popular with the punters, the $5,005, the micro, the single entry. They're all the contests there on draftstars.com.au. I've opened up the page for this particular contest. Saints versus Tigers, a 7:20 p.m. start on Thursday evening, so don't get caught short there with the earlier start time. Currently, the Tigers are 14.5 favourites at $1.45 if you want to go head-to-head, and the total is at 175.5. We got the teams here earlier this evening with Daniel Rioli and Camden McIntosh, a couple of big ins for the Tigers, whereas the Saints are actually unchanged. There was news that Rowan Marshall was going to miss, but he got selected. So, Hef, before I get your thoughts, a little stat here for you. The Smatho stat. Secure to field the top 7 fantasy positions last week when they played the Eagles, which really just goes against the trend so far this season, where the Saints have been a side that kind of leak points to opposition players. So to see them filling the top 7 against the Eagles was quite a surprise. So, Hef,
there's not a stat I wanted to hear again, Smatho. Being an Eagles fan. Interesting, yeah. The Saints were hard to score against last year. They're one of the stingier teams, and interesting that they didn't give up 1 ton at all last week. So maybe they've finally found their mojo this season.
All right, let's start with the rucks then. So we do have Rowan Marshall. I was spending the day researching a bit of Pavarotti, but possibly coming back into the side. Also a bit of Paul Hunter as well, thinking, yep, he's going to be back for the Saints. But lo and behold, Rowan Marshall at 14,070 is the selection for the Saints. And then our friend Toby Nankervis at 11,450 is your second selection. So is it a coin flip, or do we need to really have a look at these particular two ones for this position?
Well, we've spoken a lot about how Nankervis is very easy to play someone against. Lysett came up with the ton against him last week, but Nankervis had the ton right back at him. And he does have the high ceiling, Nankervis, that we sort of mentioned on the show. There was nothing to suggest he could go big from his early games in the year, but there it was, the big ton. Now, Rowan Marshall is a guy we've also been able to target. So I not really game to go a double ruck stack with Marshall at that $14,000 price tag, especially with the injury concerns over him. I think Nankervis is probably the safer option. And even though we're just talking about small sample sizes, interesting that Nankervis is more middle of the pack this year in terms of points conceded in the rucks, as opposed to being right up the top where we've come to know and love him.
You happy for me to put Nankervis in our little side here tonight?
Oh, I'm happy to go Nankervis.
Excellent. All right, let's move on to the backs. Now, also, I want to give a bit of a shout out for you here for last week, because I wasn't really keen on Basher Hooley coming back from injury at that 10K price tag, but he did play pretty well for fantasy-wise. I've been reading some stuff that he's kind of washed up, but he's now at 12,490. His average there is sticking out there at 110 from last week. Do we double down on Basher this week in this matchup against the Saints?
Well, last week we spoke about targeting Richmond in the back line. We were looking at all sorts of Port Adelaide players, and they all came through, really, those Port Adelaide defenders. But the flip side was Short and Hooley were the two main guys for Richmond as well. So all the points were in the back line. As you say, Hooley's gone up, probably not quite to the price we're used to seeing him at. We've seen him higher than 12,000, so I think there's still a little bit of value there. Short is pretty much settled now around that 13 to nearly 14,000 bracket. I think there's still enough value that you can play either of them, but we spoke a lot last week about Richmond giving up uncontested possessions and uncontested marks and points to back. So we looked for players that fit the bill there for Port Adelaide. A lot of them came through, so I think we'd want to be doing the same again when it comes to the Saints. Now, the thing about the Saints is you look at their backline, there's not a heap of those sort of halfback flankers. Port, we know, have got a ton of them, and they love to chip the ball around. The Saints, they don't come to mind as much. Looking for someone a little bit left field, if you just scroll up a bit around that $10,000 mark, I think there's a guy who's not going to be overly popular is Nick Caulfield. But you see there, that's some pretty ordinary numbers for that $10,000 salary. But if we look at last year, he did start to build a pretty impressive run of scores, just getting a lot of mark kicks, a very good intercept marker, and he is one of the guys that can get on the end of the +6. So Nick Caulfield's a bit of a left fielder for me. Callum Wilkie is another left fielder. He's another guy, you see there, he's got that high ceiling, Callum Wilkie. It's not going to come off very often, but he's going to be pretty low owned. He's pretty cheap. And if Richmond are going to give up a lot of uncontested ball again, he's a guy that can get on the end of some of those useless mark kicks in the back line.
All right. Well, let's get Callum in. And then obviously we can probably rely on this of the safety of Short, or take the discount with Hooley.
I'd lean to the discount Hooley, but not much between them.
Not much between. All right, let's move on to the mids. Now, Draftstars are pretty much forcing us to play Kane Lambert this year, because at 12,770, look at that consistency in his fantasy scores. You'd be almost leading possibly outside of Dustin and for actually fantasy points scored. 98 last week, and at 12,770, he looks like a pretty popular pick there. Let's start the Tigers first. we'll put Martin in the forward category because everyone loves playing Martin in the forwards. Anyone here in the Tigers that really take your fancy on this particular side?
Well, look, Shea Bolton bounced back to a bit of form last week. He's still getting a fair bit of work on the ball up there at the 90. So he's definitely a guy who's possibly a bit underpriced. And I talked up Graham a little bit last week. I thought that matchup with Port would suit him, but he was pretty disappointing again, Graham. And he didn't get much look in the centre bounces at all, just 12% attended. They've settled with a really solid four-man rotation there, Nankervis, Martin, Cochin and Shane Edwards. So you can have a look there at Shane Edwards at around 11,000. He's a pretty safe option without having a massive ceiling. He'll pop off every now and then for a big ton, but he is getting plenty of work through the midfield, Edwards, which is a tick for him, and it's a big cross for Graham on those numbers. Cochin's a bit the same as Edwards, but Bolton's a guy that sort of catches my eye at about 10. We got up to about 12,000 with him last year, so he's potentially the guy with a bit of upside there.
All right, let's get Shy in there. As I scroll down here, there's not much in terms of value down here at all. Jack Bytel is obviously a promising Saints midfielder who is getting the odd CBA for the Saints, but it seems to be battling with the Billings and with Crouch back in the side as well. It's really hard to really trust any value. Would you agree with that?
I'd prefer to go against Bytel just on the basis that I'm targeting the uncontested players. He's got a very contested side to his game, Bytel. Looking for a cheap guy, I'm happy to go with Sinclair here in the midfield. He sort of fits that sort of half-back. Now he's had the role change, Sinclair. He plays across half-back, and he fits the sort of bill that I was talking about with the defenders. So especially if you're looking for a Saints stack, Sinclair's a guy who will link up with those defenders, and you can use him through the middle. And he does get a fair bit of uncontested ball when he's playing his best. So I don't mind Sinclair there to save a bit of salary.
All right. Well, let's get Kane in there as well. Steele, fantastic fantasy scoring so far this year, highlighted by 2 120-plus scores in his last 2 games at 16,540. Seems to be a reasonable price, but that lack of value could mean that some will jump off to a Brad Crouch, who scored 125 himself and at 14,240. So would you be doing everything in your efforts trying to get to Jack Steele as the field will go to Brad Crouch, or you just be happy to select Crouch and move on?
I don't have massive opinions either way on each of these guys. Crouch is potentially a little bit underpriced there at 14,000. We've seen over many years what he can do, and we aren't really scared to play the big midfielders against Richmond. We know they don't tag. Crouch is definitely a guy they wouldn't really bother tagging anyway, and neither is Steele. So I think whatever guy fits your lineup best, that's obviously going to be Crouch a lot of the time. They're both worthy players for me. Another guy I don't mind is Zach Jones as well from the Saints. He's just starting to build, I think. Now he's got 3 games under his belt, and he can get a bit of uncontested ball himself. So if you're looking to save plenty of salary through the middle, he's another guy to take a look at, Jones. And even Hill fits that uncontested sort of mould as well, doesn't he?
Yeah, 105 last week too. So that's going to be, that
I
feels.
think there's lots of options there, and I'll definitely be having a St Kilda stack with all these outside players.
All right, let me just fix this up then. Let's get Zach in, because I like the Zach there, and then let's get in Kane. Let's get Kane in the forwards, because I'm still keen on him. We'll leave that spot open here. So let's get on the forwards then. Dustin Martin is obviously the clear choice in this particular spot here. Now, talk came from the Saints camp today, especially from the coach Ratton, saying that, look, they might put some work into him. I'm not sure if Dustin Martin is a taggable play. He seems to have that mold of, well, I'm just going to play up forward, kick goals on you anyway, instead of being in the midfield. So is it a risk, Dustin Martin at 13,710 with the chat coming from the Saints camp?
Well, I was trying to think who would tag him, Smatho. You got any help for me there?
Are they going to?
Yeah, or Steele has obviously been a guy that they've used in the past before he sort of took their mantle as the number one guy. Maybe with Crouch back, sort of taking that workhorse role, they use Steele. He's definitely got the right body size to go with Dustin Martin. Whether he's got enough tricks when Dusty takes him forward, I'm not so sure. But that's probably something to keep in mind with Steele at 16,000 as well. If they do look to give him a role like that. He is one guy that can tag and score all at once still, which not all taggers will do, obviously. But, yeah, outside of him, I couldn't think of too many people who could go with Dusty from the Saints.
All right, let's talk about some of the cheaper Saints options. Obviously, the Tigers are the favourites here, so you could be interested in Jack Reebott or Tom Lynch. But Jack Higgins, Tim Membry, and Josh Battle here, all above 9K. I reckon they will go a little bit lower owned than the field. Is there any of those three that catch your eye here?
I probably lean Tiger forwards. They're all sort of around that mark. No one really jumped out to me. I think as long as you play a guy who's got a bit of a ceiling, you'll be all right. Castagna, for some reason, was sticking out to me a little bit. He had a pretty good start to the year, Castagna. But I do think there is the chance with guys like Bolton and Lambert, you don't necessarily have to play an out-and-out forward. If you are looking to go a bit contrarian, a guy like Dan Butler's starting to get very cheap. Coming off that 78 last week against West Coast, might just be finding his groove again. And we did see him get up into over 10,000 last year. So potentially an option there in Butler.
All right, let's fill this particular side out then. So it's kind of tough now. We've got 11,440. I'm thinking 11.7 for Bradley Hill. Oh, I can't get the 10 memory there. That's a bit of a shame. Let's get down to Shane Edwards. There goes our Saint stack. I still can't get the 10 memory there. That's a bit of a shame.
Yeah.
Any suggestions there, mate?
No. I think that's, we're giving you the call. Play around with like a Butler Crouch combo, maybe. I don't know if you probably can't quite afford that one, but yeah, or maybe go with a look. Clayton's there chiming in for us. Move Bolton to the forward line. That's definitely an option as well. Maybe throw Castagna up forward and throw Bradley Hill into the midfield. That might work for you as well.
There's Jason. So now we've got. Oh, here we go. So Kane and Bradley. Oh, there's 1,000. There's a lot of wriggle wound there.
Well,
you don't have to spend it all, but yeah,
Billings is another guy. Billings is another guy who fits that uncontested mould as well. So if you could somehow sneak all of them in, I think there's a lot of options there, and there's a lot of guys around that 11, 12 price bracket. I think you can build a pretty balanced lineup, and the fact that there's not that many cheap guys on the slate, I don't think it's going to be an issue.
Yeah, it's a tough slate. It's a little tough game. So whoever wins that first prize tomorrow is going to be well deserved.
Absolutely, as it always is. I've never seen someone win one and say, "Oh, I didn't really deserve that one, Smatho."
All right,
maybe Broady's going to start getting that way.
Well,
maybe he's going to say, "Oh, I've had better wins."
All right, let's move on to your mob. The West Coast Eagles are tailing on Collingwood on Friday night footy. A $75,000 prize pool is available from Draftstars. Currently, the Eagles are $1.30 favourites at home with a 22-point line. Currently, the total is 166.5, and there's no issues with the weather after copping a bit of a battering during the week. So, shout out to all the Western Australian guys who have been watching the show. We, it sucks that you got that crappy weather, but hopefully you can bounce back throughout the weekend. Now, this one's a late start. It's 8:10 p.m., so you'll have plenty of time to put in your Draftstars lineups for this particular contest. As we do in the show here on Wednesday night, we don't have the exact teams at this current stage, but we do know that Taylor Adams has done his knee and he's out indefinitely up to maybe up to 12 weeks with that one. They have announced that Finlay McRae will make his debut for the Pies. Shannon Hearn has a soleus strain, also known as an old man's calf, so he could miss up to 2 to 3 weeks with that one. And there's been a talk coming around the media that Darcy Cameron could play after impressing in the scratch match for the Pies last week. And apparently he did a number on the Eagles in the finals last year, as they emphasised that throughout the day. So as you can see with the lobbies, I bring up the lobby again for this particular match. So $75,000 pool, the 10,000 high roll, the mini, the 5, the micro, the single entry, all there on Draftstars. Let's get into the particular contest itself. Let's get straight into it. Straight in the rucks here. And we're going to have a few options for this particular one. So obviously you've got your normal rucks in Grundy and Nick Nat, but we also could potentially have obviously Mason Cox up front, Oscar Allen up front, and Darcy Cameron at 7,990. So quite different from Thursday night. We could have a few to choose from here. Now I'll pose the question to you, Hef. Anyone that sticks out, or you might just have to spread the eggs in this basket?
It's a smorgasbord, that's for sure. It's one of my favourite topics, being a West Coast man, and that's how much Nick Natanui has got the wood over Brodie Grundy. We picked up on this last season. My first thought is that Grundy is just the guy I want to avoid. If you can cast your mind back to when these two teams played, Grundy was actually, well, I think it was not so much in the final. It sort of happened a bit, but I remember West Coast flogged them in the middle of the year, and to the stage where Grundy was not starting in the third or fourth quarters against Natanui, and they actually turned to Darcy Cameron. So if they do play Cameron, I'm sure that's the reason. That's the reason they're talking of playing him, because he held his own a bit better than Grundy did, Cameron. It means Cox basically won't get much ruck time at all. It's a nasty stat for me to bring up, being a West Coast man, but the last 3 times these teams have played over there, Collingwood's actually won by a point twice. So even though West Coast are all the rage, and probably deservedly so, I'm always fearful of Collingwood when their backs to the wall and they're on the road and no one gives them a chance. They just seem to pull things out of the hat too often for my liking. So obviously the other game was a 60-point win to West Coast. I'm getting a bit off topic there because we're talking about the rucks, but that's just something to keep in mind. I don't think it's... Well, we sort of talked last week with Sydney and Essendon. We said it's not just a case of Sydney turning up and winning, and Essendon really pushed them all the way. I think this match has got a similar feel to it. I'm avoiding Grundy. Nick Nat, he's pretty pricey. He did have a 90 in the final last year, and I expect he'll go well, but I don't know how much upside there is there. I'd almost be looking at Oscar Allen. Is definitely worth playing at sub 10,000. We know Collingwood can have some issues against tall forwards every now and then, so he's definitely playable in that ruck spot. Mason Cox broke all West Coast supporters' hearts last year. We took a few marks and kicked a few goals, but I don't know how much upside there is for him there as well. Darcy Cameron is maybe the second best option. I'm sort of looking at Allen, Cameron. If I want to spend up, it's Natanui. But the only strong opinion I have is I don't really want to be with Grundy.
Yeah, I have to agree with that, because you can go back and look at the stats from last year. He only had 60% time on ground against the Eagles in that particular final. Look, it's 6 months later. Doesn't have a great record against Nick Nat. It's all pointing that he's going to be a low-owned play at 14,840. It's a reasonable price for a normal Brodie Grundy.
It's not just a one-off either. That last year, it did happen a couple of times and went back to past years as well. Something about Natanui just scares him, I think. Yeah.
So
which is understandable.
In this case, yeah, it is undersell. So let's just go with Oscar Allen. We'll save a bit of money. I think if we can get a 70, 80-point performance, then that pays that salary off and we're on our way. All right, let's move on to the backs. Now, with Shannon Hearn out of the side, this could bring some opportunity for the other half-back flankers, possibly link-up players for the Eagles. But all the viewers of the show have been watching us over the years. We always go on about bang on, you need to target defenders against the Magpies. They'll let you build chip, mark, kick, then chip, mark, kick again, back to the same person. He just chip, mark, kick to you. So that's fantasy gold. Let's talk about these Eagles guys because we want to be targeting these guys. Obviously, there's no Shannon Hearn, so 12,720. We start with Lee and Duggan, and it gets cheaper from there. So, who do you think from your Eagles boys that you're looking at?
Well, I think they're all in play. First of all, I'll just run a little stat by you as well. When it comes to uncontested possessions, Collingwood have given up the most this season. When it comes to uncontested marks, they've given up the second most. And when it comes to teams accumulating uncontested marks, West Coast have clearly topped that list this year. So it matches up to a lot of mark kicks for West Coast if those numbers are going to hold true. So it's all going to come around in the back line. Like you say, no Hearn. There's talk to Witherden, who everyone would probably expect to come in and replace Hearn, that he's got a couple of little niggles of his own. If he comes in, he sort of replaces Hearn like for like in terms of fantasy scoring. But if he doesn't come in, Clayton's on the money again there. Duggan and Shep are the guys who can step up. But there are some cheaper guys that we can work with. Josh Rotham is quite happy to get involved. Jackson Nelson, if you have a look at him, he's actually shown a bit more scoring this year. He's even got the 100 in there. And even down to a guy like Tom Cole, who is a bit cheaper there at the 8,000. He's got 3 out of 4 pretty good scores at that 8,500 price, Tom Cole. So he's in play as well. Tom Barrass looks really good there at 8,800. Look at those scores there as well. I think Barrass is going to have his work cut out on Mason Cox. He's probably going to have a bit of a sting in the tail after Cox kicked 3 last year. Barrass will be the guy I imagine to spend most of the time with him. He might not be as focused on getting the ball, and he had a really low score against Collingwood last time. So maybe a little bit wary of Barrass, but there's definitely a lot of options there for the Eagles.
Now, I just want to flip it over to the Pies as well because, look, the Eagles do give up fantasy points to the backs as well. And you can check out on the Daily Fantasy Rankings website the points against tool here. There are plenty of options here for the Pies as well. They love to obviously build it out through back as well. The likes of Howe, Maynard, Noble, Chris Mayne. Obviously, he's been playing more of the wing, but he's available as a defender here. Could you obviously the contrarian plays here, but there are some good options here for the Pies.
It's not unheard of that the Pies actually go over there and try and hold on to the ball themselves. We've seen them do that before. One thing that sort of stands out is you've got guys like Crisp, you've got Duggan, you've got Chris Mayne, who are all playable through the midfield. You can get yourself some exposure to more defenders by going with that option as well. Chris Mayne's a guy who he's definitely got 100-point upside. Mayne, you saw he had 94 last week, getting more of a run up on the wing. Last year they tinkered with him a bit, put him down back, but with the injuries the Pies have got, sort of takes away from some of their midfielders, and Mayne could well get a better roll through there. So Noble's especially getting up on the wing as well. He's starting to get up in price. The algo's starting to catch up with Johnny Noble, but Mayne is definitely a guy who stands out to me there.
All right, let's pick a couple of guys here. I do want to go Eagles options here. Let's go Duggan and Josh Rotham. They're my guys here for this particular side. All right, let's move on to the midfielders. Now, Taylor Adams is a massive out for the Pies. They gave up a lot of fancy points through the Blues. They gave up a lot of fancy points against the Lions. So they're actually top of the league in terms of the midfield giving up points. So Eagle stacks are the solid play here. So let's start with the Eagles. Obviously, there's no Luke Shuey. He's out. But Gaff, Kelly, Sheed, Jack Redden, they're your main guys for the Eagles there. But you can't have them all. So which ones do you want to target?
Look, Redden is a guy that I'm pretty keen to target just on the basis that his scores go up and down, Redden, depending on the strength of the Eagles midfield. Now, we've got no Yo, we've got no Shuey. So that opens up a role there for Redden. We look at his last couple of weeks. Even with Shuey in the team, he attended 63% of the centre bounces. And then last week with no Shuey, 75% there for Redden. He was actually the second most used midfielder in the middle bounces there. So at that price, 11,800, he's definitely got 100-point upside. I think he's he's going to be popular, or he should at least be. But he doesn't have the name of the likes of Sheed and Kelly and Pendlebury's going to be. We'll get to Collingwood in a second, but Redden's definitely a guy I want to be having a lot of.
Anyone below Redden that we could potentially target here, or they're just not going to get any run?
Well, it'd be interesting if they bring in O'Neill. He's the only sort of cheap guy I could see from the Eagles. Young fella, but if he does play, he will get some mid-time, I would imagine. He's not a guy they're going to come up and waste him up forward. So if O'Neill plays, I think he's a viable option at 6,000.
Without doing my research, I heard that Mark Hutchins is not far away, but he'd probably play Waffle to start with.
Yeah,
so
I think you're right. He's getting close though, Hutchins, and that's a cheap price for him.
And then Isaiah Winder, he played last week. There we go, but only for a 26. So he's just a wait and see guy.
He's more of a smaller forward at this stage of his career, Winder, but
fair enough. All right, so let's talk about pies then. So obviously no Taylor Adams. Automatically you think Scott Pendlebury's just going to take this midfield on his shoulders and run with it, but his price has finally caught up, 14,110.
Is his price the only thing that's caught up, Smatho? That's controversial. It's like shooting Bambi saying bad things about Scott Pendlebury, but he's looked a step behind for a couple of weeks. Is that fair to say?
I didn't catch much of the Giants game. Look, I saw the result and thinking, oh, geez, well, the Pies season's now on tenterhooks with no Taylor Adams. But
he's been doing some un-Pendlebury things, but in terms of fantasy, that's not a massive issue. What I want to highlight is last week, there's a couple of guys who saw a boost in centre bounces up over 50%. Was Crisp, for starters.
Yep.
We're sort of getting the best of both worlds with Crisp. If he plays down back, it's a pretty decent spot. And if he does get in the midfield, the Eagles midfield isn't too scary to go up against, to be honest, especially with those injuries they've got. And the other guy is Sidebottom, who 58% last week in centre bounces. And with no Taylor Adams, there's got to be someone coming in to take that sort of 80% of bounces that he attends, Taylor Adams. And I think Sidebottom is a guy that they might look to. I've got caught out a number of times calling for Sidebottom in the middle of the ground, and it hasn't eventuated. But last week, the uptick was definitely there. We know he can go massive Sidebottom if he's given the role. And geez, they're starting to look thin in the midfield, Smatho. Why won't he get the role?
That's right. Now, being forward available, would you chuck him up in the forward line?
If you can afford it, I think it's going to be difficult because there's not a great deal of value on this slate.
All right, let's put him in there for now. Of course, I want to get Eagles options. Dom Sheed will probably be the most popular one here at 12,430, but I don't mind it. That gives me my little Eagles stack who could get a boost. Collation's here suggesting Brander at 9,260 as a bit of value, so I don't mind that.
Main's a guy you can throw in at 10,000. I think he's definite value.
All right, so that leaves a little some church change here for the forwards. Now, also we'll do our due diligence here and talk about all the players in this particular position. Jamie Elliott, 11,230 leads the Pies here with Jordan De Goey back under 10K at 9,890. Hoskin Elliott 9.6. Brody Myercheck at 8.6. So these are good cheap options if you think the Pies are going to do the number over there. Is there anyone that kind of stands out value-wise?
In terms of cheap options, I can't forget the game of Myercheck last year when he sort of popped a few goals in and sunk the Eagles. But you know my theory about the Eagles giving up points to just one unlikely forward, Smatho. I think Myercheck fits the bill there, so he's a reasonable cheap option. We've got O'Neill we can play up forward there. He'd actually be quite a good option. Further down there, Jack Petrocelli at 6,000. If you're looking to save some cash, he was really good against Secura. He's very hit and miss in that small forward role, but he does have a ceiling if things are going his way, Petrocelli. He might be a bit over-owned coming off that big outing. Finlay McRae is a guy we need to talk about. He's 6,000 now.
Yes, he's not.
I dare say he's probably going to be over-owned just because of his name. If if you don't know, I'm sure most people watching will know, this is Jack McRae's younger brother. Comes with some big raps. Not as big a junior ball winner as what you might imagine, the name McRae. Although Jack McRae, when he came through, he wasn't a massive ball winner in underage either, and sort of developed pretty quickly in the AFL system. But he's going to get plenty of opportunity, I imagine, McRae. And at 6,000, he stands out as a really good cheap option.
I do actually have his 2019 NAB League fantasy scores from his last, say, 4 games, and he's gone 82, 92 fantasy points, a 38, and a 78. And they only involved 2 goals over those 4 games. Had 20 plus disposals in 3 of those games. Now, it is 2019. It is the underage NAB League, but
it seems
that he can find the footy.
It is important to realise with those numbers too, that's when he was a bottom ager in under 18. So last year he obviously didn't get much exposure with everything that went on last year with the virus, but they're pretty good numbers for a bottom ager, McRae. He's going to be popular, especially on a slate with not a lot of value in terms of the cheap guys. But he's a guy that I would have a bit of confidence in playing,
now,
even though we haven't seen him.
Yeah. Now, by selecting Finlay McRae, I was able to get to Pendlebury or Tim Kelly. So that kind of makes my side a little bit more safer. But for those GPP ones, if you want to leave cash on the table, again, you will be unique. And obviously, if they pop for you, then you're going to be up towards the top of the leaderboard. No worries at all. All right. Now, any final thoughts for these particular 2 games for this round 5 matchup of daily fantasy footy?
Well, I'm just hoping we see the 10-goal Eagles and not the 1-point loss Eagles this week. They're a bit hit and miss sometimes, my boys. But there's a couple of tricky slates because there's in the positions that we want to target, there are a ton of options. It's not like we can zero in like we can on occasions. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of very similar teams, I think.
Okay. Now, obviously, Hef, I did mention earlier in the show, we are back next week on Thursday. So make sure you don't come knocking on Wednesday evening saying what we're doing for the show. We're going to be doing on Thursday. I'd like to thank all the viewers tonight's live stream for popping those questions. Make sure you check out the replay on our Daily Fantasy Rankings YouTube page. Give us a like, subscribe to the channel. We'll be able to do some more content throughout the season. All right, Hef, we'll wrap it up here. Thanks, mate, for joining me again for the DFS Down Under show, mate.
Thanks, Smatho. Much smoother when you're back home and not caravanning around somewhere.
Look, I did enjoy the caravan, but I didn't enjoy the tech glitches last week. So thanks for all coming back to this week, and good luck if you're playing on Draftstars this week, and we'll see you soon. Cheers.
Thanks, mate. See you.